Last week, I showed you how to create a metallic edge using plain cardstock and embossing powder. Well, you can also create beautiful metallic embellishments for pennies. And because these embellishments are not made of metal, they're much less expensive to mass produce and to mail. Let me show you the tools and products you're going to need to do this technique. You're going to need a Versamark pad, some embossing powder, and in this case I'm using the gold metallic superfine detail embossing powder by Ranger. You're also going to need an anti-static pad. You're going to need some scissors, some dies or punches, and I'm using some of the Nestabilities dies in the Petite ovals and also the Petite Scalloped ovals, and then I'm also using one of the Spellbinder's fancy tags. You're also going to need a rubber stamp, and I am using one of the rubber stamps from the new Winter Wonderland stamp TV kit. Some scissors and adhesive, and I'm using a little bit of the Pure Luxury Ivory cardstock, and I like to use the heavy base weight cardstock for this technique, especially because we're going to be doing some embossing, and the heavy base weight cardstock really holds its shape and doesn't warp when you're embossing the way some of the lighter cardstocks can. Then I'm going to use my Marvy heat tool. I'm going to start out with a piece of the Ivory heavy base weight cardstock, and I'm going to stamp the winter greeting onto the cardstock. But before I do that, I need to remove any static from my cardstock and any oils or anything that might be on the cardstock that would attract embossing powder. Next, I'm going to use some Versamark ink, and I'm going to stamp my greeting. Okay, now that I have my greeting stamped, I'm going to use some of the embossing powder. So I'm going to use a piece of scratch paper here, and then I'm going to sprinkle the fine detail gold powder all over that greeting. Now you can see where the greeting was and just wipe away any of the excess that got on there. And I'm going to replace the embossing powder into the jar. Now I'm going to use my heat tool and emboss that just until it gets nice and shiny. Doesn't take very long, but I certainly want to emboss it before I cut it out using the Nestabilities dies. And you want to be careful with the fine detail powder that you don't burn it. So as soon as it changes from that dusty dry look to the shiny look, it's done. My next step is to cut out this greeting using one of the Petite ovals dies. And I'm just going to line that up. One of the things I love about Spellbinder's dies is you can stamp first and then line it up perfectly. And using the C plate for cut, I'm going to cut that out. Now I also want to emboss that, so I'm just going to flip it upside down and pop it out of, keeping it in the die, but getting rid of the excess. I'm going to put my tan mat on top, and then I'm going to use the B plate. Remember, B is for emboss, and then a piece of chipboard on top just to give it a little bit more push, and run that through. You'll love this greeting from the Winter Wonderland kit because it's so nice and big and bold that it's actually not only a greeting, but it's also a focal image because it can really take up a nice chunk of your card. As you can see, I've already cut out some of my layers here that are going to layer around my focal image, underneath my focal image. I've also cut one of the Spellbinder's fancy tags, and I've embossed it because I want all of those raised edges to show when I emboss this with gold, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that next. Okay, so I'm going to move these dies out of the way. And I'm going to create a gold metallic edge like I did in last week's episode, but for this one I'm just going to rub my Versamark pad directly onto the edge of this oval. Since it's an oval, it's a little bit easier to do it this way than to lay the paper down on its back. And I'm going to sprinkle some gold embossing powder on there now. Like that. Just move that a hair. And then I'm going to tape the whole thing to the scalloped oval. And that'll set it off so pretty. And that metallic edge perfectly matches the embossed greeting, which is really nice. But now I want to add a decorative area onto the sides. So that's where my fancy tag comes in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ink up the whole one side with Versamark. And then pour some embossing powder on top of that. And emboss that. And you'll see how pretty and almost a little bit antique looking this comes up after it's embossed. Isn't that pretty? Looks just like a metallic embellishment, something that you would pay quite a bit of money for. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And add some embossing powder on there. Now once the embossing powder is all cool, you can take a pair of scissors and just cut that in half. And now I'm going to attach these two ends to the sides of my focal image, like that. So let me get a little bit of tape on the back, both sides. And then I will place those exactly where I want them on both sides. Just like that. Now you've created this beautiful adornment on the side of this oval that perfectly matches all of your gold embossing and your gold edge and creates that look of metal for just pennies, and it's not bulky and it's not heavy. Let me show you my finished card project. Here in my finished card project, you can see I used a little bit of gold-lined ribbon, and I just attached that right to the surface of the card using some copper brads. You can use gold brads too. I decided to use copper because I wanted the copper to stand out a little bit against the gold rather than just blend in. Try using other dies and paper punches to create metallic corner accents, buttons, and so much more.